Welcome to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today we have a very special guest. Ina Pinkney has been feeding Chicago for 33 years. She's a culinary legend, starting with a bakery for 10 years and then her famous restaurant, Ina's, for 22 that closed last December. Ina, we're so glad you're here.
I'm so happy to be back in Glenview. I was at the library not too long ago and so many of my regular customers showed up to see me, so this is an extra special treat for me.
So I know we talk about your memoir and a cookbook. What made you write it?
Well, first of all, I had been in business for 33 years, and I had a lot of extraordinary recipes and customers who loved to eat what I cooked. And when I thought about closing the restaurant, it dawned on me that I really didn't have any family to whom to leave these recipes. I know some people have grandmas who cooked and aunts who cooked and got the little 3x5 cards in a little box, and those are treasures. I had no one to whom to leave these, and I thought I need to put them in a book, but not just a book of recipes, not just a little spiral bound something. I needed to be able to share the story of how I began in this business and the fact that I didn't bake my first cake until I was 37 years old, and how I created the environment in which we served delicious food. But mostly, it was a chance for me to become a fully integrated person for the very first time. Yes, there was Ina the brand, and yes, there's Ina who just goes grocery shopping and does her laundry, but there was also Ina the polio survivor. And I was able to tell the story of getting polio as 18 months old and what that was in terms of my life and a problematic childhood, but that it didn't stop me from changing direction many times and opening up a bakery and then a restaurant.
So somehow closing the restaurant helped you have time to reflect on everything.
Well, I'm a very introspective person always, and I always had it in my mind how I was going to roll out the closing, whenever that was. I think everybody needs to have an exit strategy, and so mine was sort of percolating for many years. But it was a question of which stories I wanted to tell.
That must be hard to decide.
It was. There were a lot of really good stories, a lot of them about the restaurant, a lot about my life, but they have a certain flow in the book from when I was a child to the kinds of jobs that I had and the people along the way who influenced me, and then baking that first cake at 37. So the stories are in there in a very mindful way, and some of them even lead to recipes. There's a story in there about my dad teaching me literally how to walk. Yes, from polio and all my surgeries, but how to walk the streets of New York. Because we would always walk down the street and he would check the traffic light at the other side where we had to cross. And he would go, okay, it's going to be red when we get there, so let's cross over here. And then go over there, and then we crossed over there. So we zigged and zagged to where we had to go. And so walking with him was a treat, because I never remember standing at a corner waiting for a red light. He had organized it so great. And then along the way, we would stop at his favorite dairy restaurant in New York and have potato pancakes. And so the recipe for the potato pancakes that he loved is in there too. So some stories lead to recipes. Some stories are just my way of taking you through my life.
And you remember many important people in your life through the food that they liked.
Yes, absolutely. And I learned a lot along the way without knowing I was learning. Going to one particular restaurant here in Chicago called Le Perroquet, where Yvonne, the owner, really saw everything. He was hyper vigilant. I watched him watch everything, and I took on that same motion. I found myself standing in my restaurant just going kind of like this, making sure that I took everything in and spotting, a potential problem, or the way a server was at the table. I could tell there was some problem, and I would just gently go over there and sort of intercept in a very kind way to be sure the problem was taken care of.
But that's very hard to do, because there's so much going on in a restaurant, in a bakery, where things have to be done right at the timing, you say, right? The timing, and then everything's perishable. Tell us a little bit about what it's like.
I'm going to give you an example. When you hear a plate break, you think, oh, a plate just broke. When I heard a plate break, I would say, okay, where did it break? Did it break on a customer? Are there shards of china? Did anybody get cut? Did the food fall on the floor? If so, is somebody cleaning it up right away before it becomes a hazard? Did it fall on the carpeting, which is even more difficult then to clean up? Do we have to remake that dish now? And what does that mean for the other people at the table? Do we have to remake their food, or will they accept their food right now and we'll quickly make the other one? And so everything happens in that moment that I hear a plate break. You just hear a plate break. I have 14 things that go through my head. Same thing with the ice machine. I cannot tell you how long it takes for a cycle for the ice to drop. I don't know, but I feel it. And if I haven't heard it, I will know something's wrong and go over and check the ice machine to be sure. So there are these nonverbal things that happen, the sound, the lack of sound.
Yes.
So all of those things matter in a restaurant or a bakery or any food service production place. I've always said that life is like baking a cake. It's raw for a really long time, and it's perfectly baked for a short time, and it's over-baked forever. And so that's life, but it's also a cake. You know, you don't check that oven in time, and you have ruined a whole bunch of things. So there are lots of things that go on in restaurants and food service that are always in the crisis mode, always.
But in your book, do you help people learn to enjoy life, take life slowly?
I do. You know, the name of the book is Taste Memories, Recipes for Life and Breakfast. And there are a lot of recipes for life in there. My dad was one, whenever I would fall, he would come over and help me up and say, Ina, you only have to get up one more time, then you fall. And that's really been my mantra for all my life, which has made me pretty fearless, which makes other people really afraid about how fearless I am. So I have a lot of recipes for life in there too. And when I talk about the business, I say that on the top 10 list of dreads for an entrepreneur, top 10 list, death is not on that list. Making payroll is on that list. So I have a lot of little things that I scatter throughout the book that make people understand that there's more to this than just recipes.
My parents had a bakery. They had a Chinese bakery, which is just very simple, 3-4 products that we sold to wholesale to supermarkets. It was hard enough just running our 5 products. How do you step up from a bakery and into a restaurant? It seemed like even harder. I can't imagine.
During the years I had the bakery, I would eat breakfast out every day. And on the back door of our house, we had a list of restaurants we could stop at, my husband and I. And we had a list of 6. And we wrote down on each one the best thing they had. So we had to decide what we wanted to eat before we left the house. And if he wanted really good French toast, there was 1. And if I wanted a good omelet, there was 2. So we had to figure out where we were going. And it was very funny because in the 80s, breakfast was very thoughtless. Yes. Coffee was really insipid and food was mindless. It was terrible to eat out all the time. But it was the only time I could get a whole meal before I went into the bakery. And so somewhere in the 10th year, I think, I just said, why can't anybody make a great breakfast? And he said, well, every day you play with butter, flour, sugar, and eggs, every day. And nobody knows those ingredients better than you in the bakery. What are we eating? And I went, oh, I guess we're eating butter, flour, sugar, and eggs. And I went, okay, I can think about this. I can do this. And I came up with a menu of ideas of food I wanted to eat. And so everything was very different on there. There was this baked pasta frittata. There was this, my version of a scrapple, the East Coast version.
Make us hungry now.
It made everybody hungry. But I decided I liked the hotel dining rooms because they were so quiet and elegant.
Yes.
But
so
I
peaceful.
loved, very peaceful. And I didn't like the diners. I didn't like clangy, bangy, noisy. I didn't like that. So I decided to go right over here and make a neighborhood restaurant that was fine dining. So when you came into Ina's, there were tablecloths, and there was fine service, and there was always a coffee pot on your table. You got to choose when to pour coffee into your cup. You know how you go into some restaurants and you get this perfect cup of coffee and you make it the way you like it, and you take a sip, and then the server comes by with a pot and she goes, "Do you want to warm up?"
Yeah.
And you know if you don't take it, you're never going to see her again with that pot. But she's just ruined your perfectly great, perfect cup of coffee. So we decided now it was never going to happen. So you'd always have a pot coffee on the table for you to determine. And then the butter would always be unsalted butter and soft. So it would go on the delicious bread that we had. So there were a lot of requirements that I had for a restaurant I wanted to eat in. So that's how I did it. I built it for my taste, which was very different than other things that were being served.
Right. At that time, there was very standard what
Yes,
you can have.
it was
for
really
breakfast.
blah. And the people started saying, "My God, this is so delicious." And that's a word we heard throughout the 22 years of being in business. Delicious. People would say, "That was delicious." Now, you know, you go out to eat, and when you finish eating, you know you're not hungry anymore. But you really can say, "Oh my, that was really delicious." We say it very rarely now, and that's very sad, because it has to have that yum factor. It has to be so good.
So what is your favorite ingredient to work with? Is this still flour, eggs?
It's eggs. It's always eggs, because that really transcends all of the things that I ever made.
It's not easy to work with eggs, though.
No, it
Eggs
really
are-
isn't. And you know what's interesting? I was at another restaurant for breakfast the other day. I review restaurants now for the Tribune for breakfast only on the third Thursday of every month. It's in the
sounds like
diner
your
section
specialty.
called Breakfast with Ina. So I was out looking at a restaurant to think about reviewing it, and one of my old customers was there. And we had a little chat, which was lovely, and he just said, "I don't understand why your eggs were so much better than everybody else's eggs." And I said, "It's because we used pasteurized eggs, which are the freshest, safest eggs you can use." And he had no idea. We had told everybody, and it was in the newsletter, but he didn't put it together that they were more delicious than the regular eggs that you buy in the store. They're fresher, they're better. Davidson's eggs is what we use. We were the first restaurant to use them in Chicago, and always did that. So yes, eggs. Eggs, I mean, the most obvious, through bakery and
Right.
through breakfast restaurant. Eggs.
Everybody has eggs in their refrigerator, but
Right. Not good ones and not safe ones. Only the pasteurized from Davidson's are the safest. And we always push that, always. I'm proud to push certain people, like Tim Burton's maple syrup we only used from southern Indiana. I know you can get it from Vermont and New Hampshire and Quebec, but I wanted to get it locally.
yes, and it means a lot to
It
us
does.
now.
It means a lot to us.
So your recipes were time tested because every day you have to make them, but how do you reduce a recipe that was probably for 20 people down to a home style, so you can make in your own kitchen? Because that's, I know, that's my parents'
Yes.
problems with reducing a recipe that's for 30 pounds of dough.
It's very true. And just like I had to do trial and error to scale it up, I had to do the same trial and error to scale it back down again. In many cases, I had the original recipe that I would make as a test at home, handwritten long time ago, and so I was able to resurrect it and recreate it and have it as a small amount to serve 4, to serve 6, because it was the original recipe that I started with, and then really had to try to scale it up. But it's very challenging, very challenging. We had one recipe for years people would ask us for, the vegetable hash. And we made it in such quantity that I didn't have the energy to try to bring it back down, but for the book we did. I put somebody on it and I said, "Get it done. I don't know how to do this anymore, so you do it." So they did.
Did you have other people test it before you you publish?
Yes. You
Because
have to
I
do
heard-
that. It has to work.
Yeah.
The worst thing that can happen is you open up a cookbook and you say, "Oh, this looks good," and you try to make it and it doesn't work. That's the worst thing that can happen. The other thing about the book is the photography in there. We didn't send the recipes to the photographer and have someone else make it. if you came into the restaurant and sat down and ordered the pasta frittata, we made yours, and then we made the second one and took it upstairs to the second floor where the photographer was all set up, and he took a picture of it. So it's the same thing you were eating downstairs in the restaurant, we were taking a picture of upstairs. Wow. So this is really our food in there, and it's beautiful, beautiful photography because the food was beautiful. It tasted good, but it was just beautiful.
So did you select the pictures, or you just
he
trust
did.
him?
I trusted him. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. And some of it took very little. For example, I made the cheesecake in there. I made it at home at night because I didn't have any room in the kitchen. We were so busy. So I made it at home, and I brought it to him in the pan. And he took it out of the pan. It had a removable bottom, and he lifted it up, and he said, "This is perfect." And he just took a picture of it. You know, we didn't do anything to our food. We just served it.
That's wonderful.
It was really quite wonderful.
Yes.
So putting the book together, which is really what we started to talk about, was a labor of love. I wanted to be sure that the recipes lived on. I wanted the pictures to be authentic. I didn't want them to be done in a studio by a food stylist who was making them the way he or she thought they should look. This is what we served every day.
So you took these pictures while the restaurant was still open. So you knew you were going to write this cookbook?
When I announced the closing, we announced 4 months in advance of the closing because I wanted to be able to capture the stories and say the goodbyes that were appropriate.
Well, it would take, if not 6 months, right, to say goodbye.
I mean, the longer you had, the longer it would take.
Yes.
You know there are restaurants who lock the door at night and there's a sign on the door in the morning, and that's the end of them. You know that happens. It's one of the dirty secrets of our business that nobody likes to talk about. And usually the employees don't get their last paycheck, and the vendors never get paid, and it's a sad, sad situation. Very sad. We were not going to do that. We were going to go out with integrity, just the way we lived, and 4 months. So as soon as I knew that I had a deal to sell the building, because that was what precipitated the closing of the restaurant, I just said, we have to put a book together quickly. And everybody said, yeah, it'll take a year. I went, well, we have 10 weeks.
Like everything.
What? I said, everything takes as long as you have. If you have 6 months to plan a wedding, it takes 6 months.
Yes.
If you have a year, it takes a year. We had 10 weeks to plan a book. And we did. And we did it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book with heavy paper, so if you spill, you can wipe it off.
That's really impressive, to take the authentic pictures, because I think that's what's being lost now with all the Food Network and with all these type of overly dressed or styled food, that you don't get authentic looking food. They look very, I wonder sometimes if they're really edible. You know, they're probably
I looked at a
plastic.
recipe in a book, a very famous chef, a TV chef, and I was just thumbing through the recipes because he gave me the book. And I read the ingredients, and then I read the instructions. And the instructions didn't match the ingredients. And I thought, nobody could make this. Nobody could make this. In all of ours, you can make it. And people write to me all the time and say, oh, I made the Heavenly Hots for breakfast, and they're so good. So I'm happy that it all works. The book was much easier for me to do than people think. And it's because I told stories.
Yes.
I think when you're talking to people who say, I would like to write, they see it as this huge undertaking that they have to start at chapter 1, first sentence, and they have to write all the way through till, you know, the end. And that's not the way it needs to be. I want to encourage people to write small stories about their family. Write small stories about something that happened.
Very specific experience, not just just the whole, you know, when I was 8.
So the answer is write a small story and make it your story. And think about it in terms of how nice it would be to leave to family a story that they may never know about you. But just stories, little bits, put them away. And then one day there'll be a time when you want to look at the whole amount of them and see what they look like to you, and then move them around. You know, this should be here, and maybe that one should be the second story I tell. But people are overwhelmed. They think they have to write a novel, you know, starting at the beginning. And that's not what it is. If you really are a novelist, that's phenomenal. I haven't got that kind of imagination. But write a character study first. You know, I'm going to write about this young girl who's 14 years old, and this is her life, and this is what she looks like, and these are her friends. You have to really get your characters in form, and then they somehow take on a life of their own when she's interacting with another character that you've written about. They become connected in a way you'd had no idea they were going to get connected. For me, it was easy because they were autobiographical stories. You know, I could talk about my dad and what he meant to me in terms of my polio exercises. So that was an easy story for me to write.
So can you tell us another recipe that's inspired by someone, you know?
I wrote a story about ice cream, and again, that was my dad's favorite food, and I remember staying out very late one night with him. My mom wanted ice cream. We lived in Brooklyn, and Dad was going to go out at night to get an ice cream sundae. And so he asked if I wanted to go, and I was so excited because it was dark. You know, out, and little kids didn't go out dark. And we came back, and he brought ice cream for me and my mom and him. And we put it together with one little container had the ice cream, and one had hot fudge, and another one had whipped cream. And so we made, and we in the containers, and we ate them like that. I was so guilt-ridden that my poor baby brother, who was 2 years younger than I, was fast asleep and wasn't going to get any, that I put the containers one inside the other, and I put them at the bottom of the trash can so he wouldn't see them and feel badly the next day. Mm-hmm. So I write the story about that ice cream, and then I put my dad's favorite pistachio ice cream recipe in there.
So that ice cream recipe is not just for your father, it's also for your little brother.
Well, he didn't eat any of it. But my brother wouldn't have eaten pistachio ice cream, but the story was really about him and for him.
Yes.
But my father had another saying: "There's no such thing as bad ice cream." And I would go, "Daddy, that's pistachio. I have chocolate." He goes, "I'm telling you, no such thing as bad ice cream."
Well, I always heard that you can keep ice cream, but I guess it's not true. It just expires like everything else.
Yes, it does.
Like a fresh bread.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So there are lots of good recipes in there. Everything I did in the bakery, the best of what I did in the bakery, and then everything I did at Ina's is in there, everything. So you're not going to find a muffin in there, because I never made muffins. You know, just because it's a breakfasty kind of book doesn't mean that it had to have everything that everybody else has in there. I do have some lunchy food there. There's a beautiful Moroccan sweet potato stew in there that people make and love, and we served for lunch. So there's a lot of recipes in there.
Yeah.
No, not brunch.
No brunch.
Never did brunch, only did breakfast. As a matter of fact, my column is just about breakfast. So people say, you know, where do you go for brunch on Saturday and Sunday? I go, I don't go out on Saturday and Sunday. I have to find a restaurant that serves breakfast Monday to Friday. That's the only one I can write about in my column. I don't have the brunch beat. I have only the breakfast beat, which is my favorite.
So when you sold the business, or closed the business, like my parents did after 20 years in the bread business, I think that my mother missed the customers very much. It was not so much the work or the running a business. She just missed talking to her customers that would call across the states and say, "Oh, how are you? You know, how do you feel about that?" Is that what you miss most when you close the business?
Yes, I relate to your mom completely. I don't miss the business at all, the day-to-dayness of how hard the work was. And the restaurant business is harder and harder and harder. But the people, I miss them every day. But lucky for me, they come and see me talk. I mean, so many customers came to the Glenview Library to see me that night. It was so wonderful. Customers came to the bookstall in Winnetka the other day to see me as well. I was there. So I'm very blessed that I still have connection with all the people I have fed for 33 years.
Thank you, Ina, so much for joining us. We're so delighted to have you today.
I'm so happy that you invited me.
And thank you for joining us on Off the Shelf. Be sure to see us next time.